هذا كتاب أنزلناه مبارك فاتبعوه واتقوا لعلكم ترحمون.
الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We continue with Surah Al-An'am and verse number 141. 141 in Surah Al-An'am. يقول الله عز وجل: وهو الذي أنشأ جنات معروشات وغير معروشات والنخل والزرع مختلفا أكله والزيتون والرمان متشابها وغير متشابه كلوا من ثمره إذا أثمر وآتوا حقه يوم حصاده ولا تسرفوا إنه لا يحب المسرفين. Which means, and it is he who produces gardens, trellised and untrellised, and date palms and crops of different shape and taste, and olives and pomegranates similar in kind and different in taste. Eat of their fruit when they ripen, but pay the due thereof on the day of its harvest. And waste not by extravagance. Verily, he likes not al-musrifin, those who waste by extravagance. So this ayah comes after what we heard before of the evil actions of the disbelievers, and one of which is they're not grateful to Allah when they would transgress the limits and make what Allah permitted haram, and they would permit what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade only from their own desires, and it led them to do the most evil actions, and it was adorned to them as a result of their corruption in their hearts. So then in this ayah and the next verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned some of his favors and his ni'am and bounties upon the people for them to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. And as you see that everything is attributed to Allah. And when a person is reciting this ayat of the Quran, the actions that are done by the heart is to oppose and to be different than the ways of the disbelievers. So the actions done by the heart is for the person to acknowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of all of these things, and therefore to act upon being grateful, the gratefulness in the heart, to acknowledge that this is a favor from Allah, and to humble oneself and to follow the commands of Allah, not to forbid what Allah permitted, not permit to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade, and then the speech and actions will fall accordingly as even what's mentioned in this verse. So Imam Sa'di rahimahullah, he says, لما ذكر تعالى, the bottom of page 504, لما ذكر تعالى تصرف المشركين في كثير مما أحله الله لهم. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned تصرف المشركين, how the mushrikeen they deal with things. And التصرف, the word التصرف, we heard it in fiqh when we were talking about fiqh al-buyu' and then transactions, and also has its general meaning. So the way that a person would deal with things, if it's transactions, a person has the ability or the legality to make a contract or to sign a contract or to buy and sell. This is the tasarruf. And tasarruf in general is the fact that a person would have the authority to do things. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned how the mushrikeen, the disbelievers, they make this tasarruf, they would deal with things from their own desire, as mentioned before, making what halal haram. This, where did you get this ability or this power from? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not give you this authority to forbid what Allah permitted. So when he mentioned tasarruf al-mushrikeen and killing their children and the like of this, في كثير مما أحله الله لهم, in many of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted for them, من الحرث من الحروث والأنعام, the things that they cultivate, tiles and an'am and cattle, and they're being even very specific in matters as we heard. This is for the males, this is for the females. If it's dead, it's this. If it's not dead, it's something else. Rulings, ما أنزل الله بها من سلطان, no authority whatsoever from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when that is mentioned, ذكر تبارك وتعالى نعمته, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then mentioned his ni'mah, his favor, And the word ni'mah, when it's mentioned and it's attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's not one ni'mah, even though it's singular, but it refers to jins al-ni'am, the entire kind of favors, which is all of the favors of Allah. ذكر تبارك وتعالى نعمته عليهم, his favor upon them. بذلك, with all of what's mentioned, ووظيفتهم اللازمة عليهم في الحروث والأنعام, and their وظيفة, their job that has to be by necessity, comes as a result of these favors of Allah. It's given for a reason, for people to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone and to obey the commands of Allah. In al-huruth wal-an'am, and al-huruth is what they would do to the land, to plant and to put the seeds in it. The being tiling, is it tiling correct as a verb? So what is it? Telling. Okay, so telling the land. So this is الحروث والأنعام. فقال, so he said سبحانه وتعالى, وهو الذي أنشأ جنات. It is he, وهو الذي, it is he, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one that أنشأ, the one that created جنات, gardens, and أنشأ أوجد, خلق, وهو الذي أنشأكم من نفس واحدة. He's the one that created you, and he's the one that initiated you. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala initiated, he's the one that created and brought it to existence. Jannat. Jannat, plural of Jannah, and it comes from the meaning of the garden that is surrounded with trees that makes what's inside covered. And then Al-Jannah, which refers to the Jannah in the hereafter. So this Jannat is the gardens in this life, what people plant in this life. وهو الذي أنشأ جنات, he says أي بساتين. بساتين, the plural of bustan, which is gardens. فيها أنواع الأشجار المتنوعة, the different types of trees. أنواع متنوعة, أنواع kinds, متنوعة is from the same thing, that means it's different. والنباتات المختلفة, and the plants that are different from one another. وهو الذي أنشأ جنات معروشات وغير معروشات. The jannat are either معروشات or not معروشات. He says أي بعض تلك الجنات مجعول لها عريش تنتشر عليه الأشجار. معروشات, العريش is something higher, when something is above the ground. Let's call it عريش. And the Prophet ﷺ used to have a arish. That means you can call it the second floor, for example, but something that is higher from the ground. So al-jannat, or these gardens, some of the plants, they only grow on something above the ground, like the grapes, for example. They don't grow on the ground. It's not a stem and it brings grapes from it, but it grows by you making these arish, or these things that is higher than the ground. So some of the jannat are ma'rushat, and other are غير معروشات. So it says أي بعض تلك الجنات, some of these jannat مجعول له عريش. مجعول from جعل, it's made for it عريش. You have to make the عريش, you have to set it up first. This عريش تنتشر, that these أشجار or these trees تنتشر عليه, spread on it. Who's the one that gave it this ability to spread on it? And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will, He could have created it in a different way. But this is for you to reflect upon it. That yes, you do something and you put the seed and you might make the arish, right? But then who's the one that gave it the power to grow this way? And who's the one that taught the human beings how to do things for them to use the favors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because all of these ayat are mentioned for people to reflect upon this. تنتشر عليه الأشجار ويعاونها, from المعونة وتعاونوا على البر والتقوى, helps it في النهوض عن الأرض, to go above the ground, to be above the ground. وبعضها, and the other types of jannat or gardens, خال من العروش, empty. خال, that means it's empty from العروش, from these. They don't have to build anything, they don't have to make any عروش to it. تنبت على ساق, and as you know, العرش, right, is the throne, and the throne is above the ground if someone has a arsh. So al-arish in general means something above, but here this is al-arish is something where they grow the plants on it. وبعضها خال من العروش تنبت على ساق. There is no عروش for it. Why? Because it's planted on saq, on the stem. and the saq, whether the shin for the human beings, and the saq of the plants or the stem of the plants. أو تنفرش في الأرض. تنفرش مثل الفراش, like الفراش bed. It spreads on the earth. Does not have a stem to it. It just grows on the earth. All of that, the different ways of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, وفي هذا تنبيه على كثرة منافعها وخيراتها. In what's mentioned, tanbih, and we talked about the word tanbih, getting one's attention, to brings the attention of the many benefits and the many khair, the goodness that comes from it. وأنه تعالى, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala علم العباد كيف يعرشونها وينمونها. He subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that taught the human beings how كيف يعرشونها. That's the verb of al-arish. How to build these things, وينمونها, how to grow these plants. And that's why not anybody can do it. And human beings, they would learn, they would be experts in it. And certain things that they would do to make it better than those who have less knowledge of it, for example. And the different variables that affects it. All of that from وهو الذي أنشأ جنات معروشات وغير معروشات. All from Allah. From the plant itself and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught the human beings. والنخل والزرع مختلفا أكله. وهير, the واو معطوفة. و means what and what and أنشأ. So أنشأ again, instead of repeating the word أنشأ. That means وأنشأ تعالى, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made النخل والزرع مختلفا أكله. The palm trees and الزرع, the things that are planted in general. مختلفا أكله, their أكل or الأكل here, that means the taste of it is different. He says أي كله في محل واحد, all of it in one place. ويشرب من ماء واحد, and they all get irrigated by the same water. And يشرب means drinks. ويفضل الله بعضه على بعض في الأكل. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make some better than others in the taste, in the food. He says, وَيُفَضِّلُ اللَّهُ بَعْضَهُ عَلَى بَعْضٍ فِي الْأُكُلِ, in the way that it tastes in eating. And he says here, وَخَصَّ تَعَالَى النَّخْلَ وَالزَّرْعَ عَلَى اخْتِلَافِ أَنْوَاعِهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the palm trees and the plants in general with its different types, على اختلاف أنواعه لكثرة منافعها, because of the great benefits and the abundance and benefits. ولكونها هي القوت لأكثر الخلق. And it's the qut, it's the necessary food for most of the people. So, and also, whether is مختلفا أكله refers to both النخل والزرع or refers to the زرع only. Even though the nakhl also has many different, the dates are different tastes, different types, and also a zara, but the zara is more clear. The differences in the zara and the produces is so much different, completely different from one another, different types, different taste. So this is والزرع مختلفا أكله, and this is to remind people of the amazing creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says والزيتون والرمان متشابها, that means وأنشأ تعالى, and that means also he subhanahu wa ta'ala made الزيتون والرمان. الزيتون is the olives, والرمان the pomegranates. متشابها, they look alike. Look alike in what? في شجرة, in the trees. The trees of both looks similar. وغير متشابه. I'm not sure if you've seen the trees of the olives and the trees of the pomegranates. They look very close. But then وغير متشابه, and they're not the same in their في ثمره, in their produce, وطعمه, and its taste, completely different. كأنه قيل, as if it's said, لأي شيء أنشأ الله هذه الجنات. So after all of that is mentioned, and that requires, since it's mentioned in tafsil, in details, is for people to reflect upon it with details, and to reflect upon it and to see how amazing is this creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how it looks at the end and how it tastes. All of that is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as if, as he says in the tafsir, someone might say, Why is it created like this? وما عطف عليها فأخبر أنه أنشأها لمنافع العباد. And what's mentioned after this, and as a result of its being there, he mentioned subhanahu wa ta'ala that for the benefits of the people. فقال كلوا من ثمره. Eat from its ثمر. الثمر is the produce. أي النخل والزرع. Palm trees and the plants in general. إذا أثمر, if it brings out the fruits. And the one that brings the fruits out is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will, He can send something to destroy it all. So إذا أثمر, eat from it. So do not forbid what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted for you. And if someone thinks that this is a way of maybe zuhd or something or humbling oneself, this is evil action. And it doesn't matter what the person would feel or the evil is adorned for him. And the command here of kulu is not an obligation that you have to eat, but it's al-amr ala al-ibah. That means it's permissible for you. Do not forbid what Allah permitted for you. If you don't feel like eating it, if you don't like to eat the olives, it's fine. It's up to you. But do not make it haram. Do not forbid it. So كلوا من ثمره أي النخل والزرع إذا أثمر, if it produces these fruits, وآتوا حقه يوم حصاده. And this is the عبودية to Allah. So eating from it is permissible. It's not going to be forbidden. Who's the one that said this? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And give its rights in the day of harvesting. This is the zakah. This is the rights that has to be given. He says, أي أعطوا حق الزرع. Give the right of الزرع or the plants or the produce. وهو الزكاة ذات الأنصباء المقدرة في الشرع. Zakah that is very specific, has أنصباء, the plural of النصاب, minimum requirement. If it's there, then you give zakah accordingly. المقدرة, measured very precisely في الشرع. أمرهم أن يعطوها يوم حصادها. This is with regards to the zakah of the produce. Anything that is planted, it's to be given in the day of harvesting, not yearly according to what you do with it, but it's in the day of harvesting. When the harvesting day, they're collecting these produce, then to give from it immediately, to separate from it the part of the zakat to be given to the poor. وذلك لأن حصاد الزرع بمنزلة حولان الحول. حصاد الزرع, the harvesting of the plants, is the same level of حولان الحول. الحول is the year. حولان is the verb of the year, the yearly time that comes, which is for the zakah of the money and other things. It's by the year. The year ends, the Hijri year, then you see what you have and you give. But for whatever is planted is the day of harvesting. So even if it's harvested more than one time every year, so it's the day of harvesting. أمرهم أن يعطوها يوم حصادها وذلك لأن حصاد الزرع بمنزلة حولان الحول. And this is the rulings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not man-made ways of things. لأنه الوقت, and this is some of the wisdom behind it. لأنه الوقت, because this is the time الذي تتشوف إليه نفوس الفقراء. نفوس الفقراء, if you're following here with the sentence, then nufus is the plural of nafs. الفقراء, the poor people. So the poor people, their own being, تتشوف, they're longing for it. They're waiting for it. If they're poor, and this is when a person is really poor. And when a person is really poor, the food is an important thing for them. But if they claim to be poor because they want to have more money, so that's why they say if you want a person to see whether he is really poor or not, he's not going to reject food because that means he's poor. He's in need of the necessities of his life. He doesn't have the necessities to sustain his life. So at-tashawwuf is when someone is longing for something, trying to look up for something that he sees from a distance. So لأنه الوقت الذي تتشوف إليه نفوس الفقراء. And imagine in an environment or a culture or places where the main source of income of the people, farming and plants and things like this, and there are rich and poor. So the day of the harvesting is a memorable day. People wait for this day. Everyone, the owner and the poor and those who do trade, it's a good day for all of them. They long for it. And not to deprive the poor from that day and not to make them wait. And to recognize when something people are longing for, recognize this. Do not overlook it. Do not condemn them while you're waiting for this. Don't worry about it. Even the Prophet ﷺ, when Al-Mal came from Al-Bahrain, when lots of wealth came from Al-Bahrain at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, فوافوا الأنصار صلاة الفجر. The people of Al-Ansar came from a distance to Salat al-Fajr to pray with the Prophet ﷺ. Why? Because there is money there. And the Prophet ﷺ did not scold them or give them maw'idha, admonition, why your hearts are longing for the dunya, fear Allah, why you're here for. No, he smiled ﷺ when he saw this from them, and he said, أملوا ما يسركم, have the good hope, and give him glad tidings. And then he gave him the reminder, فوالله ما الفقر أخشى عليكم. But first, he said to them, have the good news. Don't worry, have the glad tidings. So this is the first thing that he said, alayhi salatu wasalam, and he smiled to them. And then he says, by Allah, not poverty that I fear for you, but I fear for you that الدنيا تفتح عليكم, that the dunya will be opened for you, the materialistic things will be opened for you. فتنافسوها كما تنافسوها, and then you will compete over it as the ones before you, they competed over it. فتهلككم كما أهلكتهم. So then it will destroy you like it destroyed them. So be warned against the greed that might take you, that you might go to. But the point here that I mentioned this is to recognize that tashawwuf. When someone have tashawwuf or longing for something, do not put that person down. Whether it's a child or grown up or whatever, human beings are weak and they need the help and the support, and then to use it in a way with wisdom and leniency to remind them of what's best for them. So لأنه الوقت الذي تتشوف إليه نفوس الفقراء ويسهل حينئذ, another benefit, ويسهل at the time of harvesting, why to give the zakah? Because this is the command of Allah, but the wisdom behind it. ويسهل حينئذ إخراجه على أهل الزرع, and it's easy, يسهل, on that day, the day of harvesting, to get it out for the people of Azar, for those who planted it, because instead of taking it and storing it and pay for storage and then taking something from it for the zakah, right there, right in while they're harvesting it, they would put something aside and they would give it on the same day to the poor. And the poor are present and everybody's happy and it becomes easy. He says, وَيَكُونُ الْأَمْرُ فِيهِ ظَاهِرًا, which is another benefit. Al-amru fi, the matter in it is ظاهر, apparent. People see it. لمن أخرجها, for the one that gives the zakah. حتى يتميز المخرج ممن لا يخرج, ممن لا يخرج. So that المخرج, all Arabic here, المخرج is the one that takes things out. اسمه الفاعل, مخرج. Right? The one that gives the zakah, takes out the zakah, يتميز, becomes separate and clear from the one ممن لا يخرج, from the one that does not give his zakah. And this is one of the objectives of the showing the zakah. Showing off is not a good thing. But when it comes to the zakah, it's in some situations, in many situations, it's good for people to show it. Why? Because this is an obligation, especially if someone has lots of wealth. And when things were more apparent, nowadays nobody knows who has what. But someone has a big land and has plants in it and all produce and things like this, right? And he's a rich person. Everybody sees that he's a rich person. Where is he hiding? He cannot hide it. So that means it's a good thing that it's shown so that nobody would have envy, nobody would think bad of him. And also those who do not give the zakah, they might have some shyness and they will be exposed, so they would give the zakah. Because the zakah, yes, it's an individual ibadah for a person to do it, but it's the rights of the poor. So if someone is greedy and doesn't want to give the zakah, do we say, okay, that's up to you, you're committing sin and that's the end of it? No, this is the rights of the poor. So if there's authority, they would take it from, like what people do with taxes, for example. Can someone run away with it? No. So zakah, which is more important than anything else, this is the right, this is the fard that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala obligated on the people. But nowadays, when there is no authority to take it, you would find the matter is according to one's iman. Someone has strong iman, he gives zakah. Someone is sinful, he does not give the zakah. and then the poor people are suffering because of this. Someone is stealing the money of the poor. Not giving zakah, this is basically someone that is a thief, someone that is an evildoer. He's depriving the poor from their rights. Right? So this is how severe the matter is. So it's not left to the individual consciousness. It's the right of the poor that has to be given to them, and it's a very small portion of things. So that's one of the benefits also, that the matter becomes clear. And if the one that collects the zakah, he goes from one to the other, right? So he does not leave people alone, and he's not like transgressing the limits. It's all what he sees with his own eyes, and it's only according to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it as an obligation. So all of this, some of the benefits that he mentions here with وَآتُوا حَقَّهُ يَوْمَ حَصَادِهِ, and give the rights of الزرع and the plants يَوْمَ حَصَادِهِ, in the day of harvesting. And therefore, if there's nothing harvested, or if it's less, then there's no zakah. So unlike how things are with taxations and things like this, as zakah does not harm anyone. No one is harmed with the zakah. No one suffers from the zakah. The owner and the giver, and everybody's happy. The owner, when it's taken from him, something insignificant whatsoever. And it's not depending on, it's not related to the income of the person. It's related to the margin of profit, even. Right? So the same thing with zakatul mal. Zakatul mal is 2.5% of saved wealth, and saved over a year, not based on one's income. So if someone makes $1 million a year and he spends it all at the end of the year, no zakah on him, no zakah on his money. It's not related to the income, it's related to what's saved. This is for zakatul mal. And the human beings, وَإِنَّهُ لِحُبِّ الْخَيْرِ لَشَدِيدٌ, he loves money. When it comes to what's harvested, the plants, for example, it's to be taken in the day of harvesting. And it's more based on whether it's irrigated by the rain, or the person is spending money and doing irrigation himself. So with the details of the zakah. But it's also when it's already harvested and it's above the minimum requirement, then a very small portion of it will be given. So all of these things for people to reflect upon and to see the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So then he says, وَلَا تُسْرِفْ. وآتوا حقه يوم حصاده ولا تسرفوا. Another command from Allah: do not extravagant, do not be excessive. This is al-israf, is the excessiveness. And this is an important rule and order that is applied in many things. So he says here, وقوله ولا تسرفوا يعم النهي. This is general. يعم, that means it includes in general النهي عن الإسراف في الأكل. That includes the forbiddance from being excessive in eating. وهو مجاوزة الحد والعادة. What's the إسراف? مجاوزة, going beyond, transgressing the limit and the norm. So الحد والعادة. And that's why there's حد and عادة. There is, for example, if someone's, he's small built, and you give him the meal of someone big, for example. People are different. Someone has been working all day and he did not eat for a couple of days. He might eat more than someone that has been doing nothing and he just ate, right? So can someone says, oh, this is israf versus the other one? Of course not. Of course not. So there's limits and there is the norm. The norm is to be judged. And al-'ada muhakkama, this is something that's a rule in the Shara. The norm has its rulings in the deen of Islam to make dabt, to really precise the measures of things. What's the norm of the people? So the norm of the people, some places they eat more than others. So you cannot make one set rule, but not for a person to say this is my norm. No, the norm of what people would consider to be the norm. وأن يأكل صاحب الزرع أكلا يضر بالزكاة. And also from al-israf, that the صاحب الزرع, the owner of the plants and the produce, would eat from it, and doesn't have to be that he physically eats from it, but he consumes, he keeps it for himself. That would harm the zakah, that would affect the zakah, because that's not permissible. والإسراف في إخراج حق الزرع بحيث يخرج فوق الواجب عليه. Also, the israf is forbidden in general. ولا تسرفوا did not say تسرفوا from what? Or تسرفوا in what category? The nahi عن الإسراف period at all levels. So even الإسراف which is forbidden when you give the right of the zara, the zakah. The zakah is measured. So do not give too much more. The person would say, I want to give more. بحيث يخرج أو يخرج فوق الواجب. To the extent of which that he would bring out, take from the zakah, more than الواجب عليه, what's obligatory upon him, أو يضر نفسه, that would make him harmed, he would harm himself, أو عائلته, or his family, أو غرماءه, or the people that have, he has to give him, he took debt from them. So someone has debt and he's, mashallah, is very generous, donating here and there. Give your the money that you owe first before you start being generous with others. So rights to be observed, and a person can fall into the israf, so that no one would think that israf is only one form of israf. And some people, they have this. They love to invite people and feed people, and make الطعام is one of the good deeds, feeding people food and so on. But he's in debt, and he keeps on having walima after walima and feeding others and being kind to the poor and everything. Pay your debt first before you do these types of things, and mashallah, then becomes something good for you. So to recognize al-israf in different ways. فكل هذا من الإسراف الذي نهى الله عنه. This is all from al-israf that Allah forbade. الذي لا يحبه الله. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not love that. بل يبغضه ويمقت عليه. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates that, and يمقت عليه, the person can be punished as a result of this. And al-israf in general is something that is in the halal, but excessiveness. At-tabdhir is what's in the haram, even if it's a penny. Penny spent in haram, this is haram, this is tabdhir. Al-israf is when it's halal, but excessiveness. And that again in anything, in water, in money, in everything. Then he says, and when it comes to the israf, people would always ask, am I doing israf? Is this israf? It's a good thing to have this consciousness about it, but to remember that al-hadd wal-'ad, right? The norm. What is the norm of the people, and what the level where it makes it not difficult for the person, for himself and his family and so on. And at the same time, recognizing his state. If a person is rich, he is not to live the life of a poor person. And need to be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And someone is poor, not to live the life of a rich person. And not to say, well, it's not fair, this and that. No, this is perfectly fair. To be patient, to be grateful to Allah, things like this. He says, وَفِي هذه الآية دليل على وجوب الزكاة في الثمار. This is, in this ayah, dalil, evidence, and this is always mentioned, to show the wujub, the obligation of a zakah في الثمار, and the produce. وأنه لا حول لها. There's no year for it to measure the time to give the zakah. Because the zakah is not in everything. For example, the word الثمار here is the produce, not fruits. Fruits has no zakah on it. The fruits, like apples, oranges, like this. There's no zakah on it. The zakah is on the thimar, where people would, the qud, the necessities of the people. But this is different when it comes to zakat al-zuru' wa thimar. And we took this before. The zakah of al-zuru' wa thimar specifically. But urud al-tijara is different. Anything that is prepared to be sold, then this has zakah on it if a year passes on it. So if someone that is apple in the business of selling apples, he's not giving the zakah of a zuru', but he's giving zakah as being in the business of selling apples. So he has in his inventory, once a year he would see how much he has from the apples that are in his storage. For example, he would give the zakah of that, like zakatul mal. What if he doesn't have any storage, because he gets it and he sells it, he gets it and he sells it, so he makes money. So if he has money saved, then he will have zakah from al-mal, zakatul mal. If he doesn't have anything, then there's nothing. So this is how things are. So أنه لا حول لها. To talk about the details of that, and this is not usually the subject in the tafsir, it's in the subject of fiqh, to get into the details of the zakah. بل حولها حصادها. The hawl of, again, the zakah of the produce is حصادها, is the harvesting. في الزروع وجذاذ النخيل. جذاذ is the same as al-hasad, but it's a specific word used for the palm trees. This is how, whatever the word they use it, to pick the palm trees. Is different mechanism than harvesting, beans or something like this. وأنه لا تتكرر فيها الزكاة لو مكثت عند العبد أحوالا كثيرة. So the zakah does not get repeated if these produce are kept with the person for many years. Unless it's, he says, إذا كانت لغير التجارة, if it wasn't for trade or business. So someone, his land, he harvested the produce, he gave the portion of it to the zakah, and he put it in his storage. Does he have to give zakah after 1 year on it? No. Unless he is in the business of selling these things. He says, لأن الله لم يأمر بالإخراج منه إلا وقت حصاده. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only commanded to الإخراج, إخراج الزكاة, to give the zakah from it only in the time of harvesting. وأنه لو أصابها آفة قبل ذلك, and if آفة afflicted it, آفة, harm, disease, whatever that affected the crops, قبل ذلك, before that, بغير تفريط من صاحب الزرع والثمر, without negligence from him, أنه لا يضمنه, he does not guarantee it, that means nothing on him. وأنه يجوز الأكل, also أنه يجوز الأكل من النخل والزرع قبل إخراج الزكاة منه. Also the ayah is a dalil, evidence that it's permissible to eat from the palm trees and the plants and all of this before the crops, before the zakah comes out from it. So if people are, it's right already on the trees and everything like this, and people coming and eating from it, no harm. No one would say, well, we didn't give the zakah yet. This is no harm, that's okay. And this is the وآتوا حقه يوم حصاده وكلوا واشربوا, it's mentioned eating from it. And then he says وأنه لا يحسب ذلك من الزكاة. People eat from the what's the produce and things like this before the zakah is given, that is not to be counted from the zakah. The zakah is after whatever they eat from it. بل يزكي المال الذي يبقى بعده. You only give the zakah from what is left after people ate and things like this. So if you imagine people are collecting and they're sitting eating and everybody's enjoying, that is not to be counted from the zakah. Afterwards is whatever is left is to give the zakah from it. وقد كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, used to يبعث خارصا يخرص للناس ثمارهم. He would send خارصا. Al-Kharis is the man that his job is to estimate. And this is Al-Kharis, to estimate the produce by looking at the trees. It looks like it's going to be that much from his expertise. ثمارهم ويأمره أن يدع لأهلها الثلث, and he would command that person to leave for its people 1/3 of it, أو الربع, or 1/4, بحسب ما يعتريها من الأكل وغيره من أهلها وغيرهم, according to what people would eat from it or other would eat from it. Meaning this is in calculating the zakah. Right? So he would put aside 1/3, not included in the calculation of the zakah, because people might eat from it, someone might consume from it whatever they wish. So this is all from the ease and some of the evidences that are extracted from the ayah. So وهو الذي أنشأ جنات معروشات وغير معروشات, all from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the word أنشأ and the معروشات and غير معروشات, so that no one would attribute al-ma'rushat to himself. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that made it this way, taught you how to do it, and also made the plants to grow this way. والنخل والزرع مختلفا أكله, the way that it tastes is different. والزيتون والرمان متشابها وغير متشابه كلوا من ثمره. And to remember what the previous verses said, so the ibaha, that it's permissible for you, and the evil actions of those who forbid what they forbid without the rights to do so. إذا أثمر, but then وآتوا حقه يوم حصاده, give its rights, which is the zakah, يوم حصاده, in the day of harvesting, ولا تسرفوا. So how many commands here with regards to these favors of Allah? ولا تسرفوا إنه لا يحب المسرفين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not love al-musrifin. And this is in Jannah. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those who listen and follow the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it shows the importance of the ilm and the knowledge, and it's not sufficient for a person to like something or something seems nice or he loves Allah. It has to be according to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded. Stop here inshallah. If there's any questions, there is the attendance code is Jannatin Ma'rushat. Jannatin Ma'rushat is the attendance code. طيب بارك الله فيكم وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وصحبه وسلم. سبحانك اللهم ربنا وبحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك واتوب اليك.